Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to our webinar on the 2018 Environmentally Sustainable Agriculture Tracking Survey. My name is Dean Dick. I'm with the Ag Info Center with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry. I will be moderating this webinar, so we're going to do a couple of housekeeping items before I turn it over to our host and our speakers. First of all, if you want to ask a question during the webinar, you can either use the question box that's located on your control panel. Just type in your question, and it'll come to our organizers, and then we will put the question up on the chat area as well, so everybody can see it. The second option on your control panel, you'll see a hand. If you would like to, you can also raise your hand. We can unmute you, and you can ask the question verbally. Third thing here is that we've noticed that this morning we've got a few network connection issues. So if the sound drops out, don't worry about it. So we don't get a whole lot of questions on it. Just wait and it will come back. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Laura to do the introductions and with the presentation. So Laura, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Ung, and I'm also with Agriculture and Forestry, and I'm the lead of this survey. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today on this webinar. The Environmentally Sustainable Agriculture Tracking Survey is a survey that Agriculture and Forestry conducts every 2 years. It is the source data for reporting on the ministry outcome of Alberta's land and natural resources are managed in an environmentally responsible and sustainable manner. And it is reported at the GOA level under Outcome 2, working to make life more affordable. This survey also informs on performance of programs and services being delivered by the environmental stewardship and irrigation and farm water branches. So that's a little bit on how GOA and AF use this survey, but this webinar is about increasing awareness of this survey so that others, like everyone that's joined us here today, may use the research findings to provide insight and information to help in your own communications and decision making. So with that, let me introduce Kate so that she can take us through what we found in the 2018 survey. Kate is with Kynetec Canada and has 15 years of experience in the management of economic policy research and market research focused on all aspects of the Canadian, US, and agri-food sectors. Prior to working at Kynetec, Kate was a senior research associate at the George Morris Centre. Kate has been with Kynetec for 4 years, where she manages both qualitative and quantitative market research projects that focus on all aspects of the agri-food value chain. Kate regularly speaks with and surveys livestock and crop producers, food animal and companion animal veterinarians, consumers, and pet owners on behalf of animal health companies. Kate has worked with many agriculture and food associations to help them better understand their consumers and how consumers view the Canadian agri-food sector, as well as to test market materials with consumers as well as farmers, understand production practices on farm, and survey regarding membership satisfaction. Past clients include, among many others, Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, Ontario Pork, and the Canola Council of Canada, OMAFRA, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Canadian Cattlemen's Association, Grain Farmers of Ontario, and AgriCorp. Kate has a degree in economics from the University of Guelph and a Master of Applied Science in Environmental Applied Science and Management from Ryerson University. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Kate.
Great, thank you very much, Laura. And thank you to everyone for joining us today and for your interest in the results of our 2018 Environmentally Sustainable Ag Tracking Survey. I, along with Laura, was the lead researcher on this wave of the study and worked closely with Laura and her team to deliver this work. This is, as Laura mentioned, the study's been taking place every other year for a number of years, and Kynetec, formerly Ipsos Ag and Animal Health, has been a part of this survey for the past 4 waves of research. So I will be able to show you some tracking data from years past. So over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to give you the highlights of the year's research. I will, and Laura will provide you with information to find the full report at the end of the presentation. And it is dense, full of lots of data and more detail than I'm able to provide in the presentation. So this is a very high-level review of the results, but I encourage anyone to look up the report if you have any more questions, or ask me your questions, and I can or Laura can direct you to the right section of the report. So for the next 45 minutes, I'm just going to give a short introduction to the project. Then we'll move on to the adoption of environmentally sustainable practices and look at the 8 environmentally sustainable ag practice areas that we review in the survey. I'll briefly touch on resources and tools that are used by Alberta producers, and then I'll talk about sustainability and attitudes and familiarity with sustainability certification programs, which was a new part of the research. So the study really took shape with the recognition that Alberta Ag and Forestry had a role to play in assisting the industry to manage risks and improve efficiencies through environmental best management practices. And so if this is the goal of Alberta Ag and Forestry, then the ministry needed a benchmark to start from and to track, and therefore the original purpose of the study was to measure producers' awareness and adoption of environmentally sustainable ag practices for a benchmark, and then to track any improvements over time. So has there been a lift in any of the practices or programs and services that programs and services have been dedicated to? In 2018, the ministry wanted to measure awareness and readiness of Alberta producers to meet current and emerging sustainability initiatives, which have expectations on ag production systems. So in order to include this new research objective, we reviewed the ESATS questionnaire from 2016 to ensure it reflected the current environmental conditions and included the required tracking performance measures. But we cut back the survey in certain areas so that we could add some new questions focusing on the new research purpose. So ESATS measures awareness and adoption of eight ESA practices within 8 agri-environmental risk areas. Those are water quality and quantity, wildlife habitat conservation, grazing management, manure management, agricultural waste management, soil conservation, energy and climate change, and then some other practices that we've lumped into general practices. The new section of the study had the following objectives. We really wanted to determine the issues facing Alberta farm operations and really where sustainability ranks in importance. We wanted to identify which areas of sustainability are important to consumers or producers, and then where they feel the consumer pressure coming from. Benchmark familiarity and experience with sustainability standards, and gather perceptions of sustainability standards. So looking at the methodology, as I mentioned, this is a biennial survey. It really originated in 1997, but has really taken on the same format and methodology since 2012, and that's when my organization became a part of it. We conducted this survey over the phone using our call center, and we do that because although we're looking for a random sample of 500 Alberta farmers, it also has to be representative by region and gross farm sales. And of course, this is a tracking study, so we want to continue with the same methodology that we've used in the previous years. So with a sample of 500, the margin of error is plus or minus 4.4%, 19 times out of 20. This year's study was fielded between January 2nd and January 21st, and it took an average of about 34 minutes to complete. It was a little bit longer than we've had in the past, and that's because of the new section of the survey. And we call upon Kynetec's proprietary database of Alberta farmers, and this is also the same database that we've used over the past 3 surveys that we've conducted. So as I mentioned, quotas are set. to ensure representation by region and gross farm sales. And this is the same sampling framework that we've used in the past 3 years, so we know that we're really tracking apples to apples. And any differences you see are more related to differences in decision making and production than differences in the sample. So here's a look at the 2018 respondent profile and those farmers that answered our survey for us. So as you can see, of the 5 regions, we do try to get an equal or fairly equal number of respondents from each. And then when we look at the sample in total, we'll weigh the data to reflect the actual distribution of farms in those geographies. But with having at least 75 respondents in each of the regions, we can look at them individually as well and see if there are any differences among the regions. Same with gross farm sales. So we had a fairly equal distribution among the 3 farm sizes, and then the data is weighted accordingly when we're looking at it as a whole sample. We also look at it by farm type, and you can see 50% of the respondents that we talked to this year, the majority of their gross farm sales come from livestock, just under a third come from crops, and then 18% were mixed. We also can see the age of the respondents we're looking at. So 9% of our sample are less than 44 years and less of age. 50% are between 45 and 64, and 40% 65 years plus. And we also ask about the state of the operation. Nearly 50% of the farmers that we talk to are either in the beginning stages of their farming career, but the majority of those, we've lumped them together, are maintaining what their production levels from previous years. 13% are actively expanding their operations, and 37% of those we talk to are actively reducing their livestock production, or some enterprise within their production, getting ready either to transition out of the industry or sell their operation. I've pulled out what I thought was interesting and different about the farms that have some of our larger farms, the farms that have 250,000 in gross farm sales or above. Take farm type, for example. In our total sample, 31% of our respondents their main farm type was crops. If we're looking at just those in the larger farm size, 46% of our sample of those with gross farm sales of greater than 250,000 have crops as their main farm type. If you look at age, just under 10% of the total sample are below 44 years. When we look at just those farms with greater than 250,000 in gross farm sales, that jumps to 16% of the sample. And also in expanding, 28% of farms with gross farm sales greater than 250,000 are expanding, compared to the whole sample where it's just 13%. Also looking, we looked at or asked questions about producers so we talked to producers who have ag-related degrees or diplomas. 31% of the producers we talked to have ag-related degrees or diplomas. 18% have attended any environmental ag training sessions in the past 2 years. 62% have taken part in many of the agriculture and forestry programs that are offered. 43% have completed an environmental farm plan. 26% have used the Working Well program resources, and another quarter have worked with ag and forestry or municipal staff to make environmental improvements on their farm. So we'll move on to looking at the adoption of environmentally sustainable practices. And first, when we talk about environmentally sustainable agriculture adoption, what we're really measuring is the average percentage of environmentally sustainable agriculture practices that are adopted by eligible users. And this is derived by looking at the adoption rates of 40 individual environmentally sustainable practices that fall within the 8 practice areas, and then taking an average of all those practices. So here I've listed overall the adoption rate, as well as the adoption rate for 8 of the practice areas. So looking at the 2018 adoption score is 53%, and that was down slightly from previous years, but not significantly. So you can see the dark blue bar at the top is the 2018 result, then the light blue is 2016, 2014, and 2012 is sort of the deeper green. So 53%, it's down from previous years, but not significantly down. And looking at the adoption score by risk area, you can see that there's really 2 tiers of adoption rates. The average ESA adoption scores are highest for water quality and quantity practices, wildlife habitat conservation practices, manure management, and grazing management practices. Notably lower are the average adoption scores for agricultural waste management, with less than 50 or just at 50%, and general practices, which is down significantly from 2016. Whenever you see an arrow pointing down or pointing up, that's indicating that it's significantly higher than or significantly lower than the 2016 result. So you will see arrows throughout throughout a number of the slides. And so I'll explain why that decreased so drastically in 2018 when I get to that section in the slide deck. And the lowest adoption scores are seen in the areas of soil conservation, which is significantly higher in 2016, and energy and climate change. We're able to look at the overall ESA adoption score by a number of demographic variables. So again, the small arrows show if the score is statistically different from different regions or sizes that we're comparing. So as gross farm sales increase, so does the adoption score. You can see that it's 47% if you're looking only at farms with less than 50,000 in gross farm sales. It moves up to 53% for farms between 50,000 and 250 in gross farm sales. And then it jumps significantly to 59% for farms with greater than 250,000 in gross farm sales. And those operations that are expanding have a statistically higher adoption score than those that are maintaining or reducing their production levels. And then along the bottom, anyone who participated in these types of programs or completed an environmental farm plan or worked with ministry or municipal staff to make environmental improvements on farm all have significantly higher adoption scores than those who haven't. So I think, you know, if you're thinking about these results, they all make sense intuitively. When we looked at the results by main farm type, you don't see much of a difference. Then you really don't see much of a difference either by region, except between the south and central regions. There's a significant difference. But overall, region and main farm type there aren't significant differences when it comes to the adoption score. Really, you do see that in gross farm sales, the stage of operation, and participation in many of the ministry programs. This graph illustrates the distribution of adoption. So based on the 40 practices used to calculate the adoption score, the majority of operations, 57% in the medium, are what are classified as medium adopters, so in the middle there. And that is that they've adopted 50 to 80% of the practices for which they're eligible. Just over 4 in 10, or 43% of operators are low adopters, so they're adopting less than 50% of the practices they're eligible for, and only 2% of operations in Alberta are what we consider high adopters, and they're adopting over 80% of the practices which they would be eligible for. And as shown, you can see in the tracking metrics, the distribution of adoption, it's really been consistent over the past 3 waves. Adoption, I'd say, is decreasing slightly. So you can see in the high adopters in 2018, we've gone down to 2%, where we were at 4% 3% and 5%, but it's not significant. And then on the low adopters, you can see we've moved up to 43% from the high 30s. But again, that's not a significant change, and it's still tracking pretty well over time. I just had a question about whether does the survey self-select for households with landlines, which would skew the age data? That's a good question. This was a survey that we conducted on the phone. However, our database would include, the majority would be landlines, I'll give you that. But we do have some cell numbers for our producers. But you're right, the majority of our calls would come via landline. Okay, so moving on to the ESA practice area. So now we're going to look at each of the 8 practice areas in more detail to see what's included in each. So for each of the 8 practice areas, I'll be showing a slide that looks similar to this one. And the bar graphs show the 2018 results for each of the specific practices within the overall practice area. The overall practice area results at the top in green. The percentage of producers eligible to adopt the practice area in green, and then the percentage that actually adopted that practice is the blue bar. And on the right-hand side are the adoption rates tracked back to 2012. So practices that impact water quality or quantity are practices that are effective at preventing pollutants from entering water bodies or wells, or preventing runoff from irrigated fields. And in total, there are 12 specific practices that make up the water adoption score. The ESA adoption score is very strong at 75%. This is the highest score among all of the practice areas. And it's essentially unchanged from previous years. You can see in 2012 it was 73, went up to 75 in 2014, back down to 74 and 75 in 2018. So tracking very well over previous years. And most of the practices also track well over previous years. Overall, all 3 adoption scores for controlling runoff have declined. So we ask about controlling runoff from feeding areas, from livestock pens and manure storage, and significantly in the case of feeding areas. But I believe that's because we modified the question to make it a bit more specific in 2018, and so that's why we've seen that decline. There are also a significant difference in properly maintaining active and inactive wells. And again, in 2018, we restructured these questions to provide better definitions of both the types of wells, so active and inactive, as well as our definition of what the proper maintenance of each of those would be. And so although we are showing tracking data here, they're essentially new questions. So you can see at the top, properly seal and maintain active wells. The adoption rate for that is 95%, and I have the green arrow beside it, suggesting a significant increase from previous waves. And at the bottom, the second from the bottom is plug or seal abandoned wells, and that's declined significantly from previous waves. And again, I'll show you some results from that, but that is because I believe we changed the definitions, not changed the definitions, we improved the definitions of the types of wells and how to properly maintain them, and that's why we've seen the change there. So here's what that new information kind of looks like. Of the 80% of farmers who have active wells on their property, 95% say they properly maintained all or some of the wells, whereas 35% of farmers have inactive, abandoned, or unused wells, and only 50% say they properly sealed or sealed all or some of those wells. So with the new and improved definitions we provided, I think we have more accurate results, but again, the tracking is a bit off on these questions. The respondents are more likely to properly maintain their active wells than their abandoned ones. So what we found on average is that respondents have 2 of each type of well and maintain all of their active wells, but only half of their inactive wells. I'm going to practice area number 2, but I do see that there is a question that you don't understand adoption and the eligibility relationship. So what I mean by eligibility is not all of the some of the practices we're asking about wouldn't be pertinent for all of the producers that we talk to. So for example, managed grazing, we're asking those that managed grazing, we're asking those that have livestock and that are grazing their livestock. So the eligibility percent, so 49%, if you're looking at the second, managing and grazing to encourage natural rejuvenation of understory and woodlands. If we're looking at that practice that's on the slide right now, 49% of the producers that we talk to are eligible for that practice. And of those 49%, 71% of the producers conduct that practice. So I hope that makes a bit more sense. So moving on to practice area number 2, this is wildlife habitat conservation. And this includes management practices that preserve natural habitats and wetland ecosystems. There are 3 specific practices that make up the overall adoption score. And a new question was added in 2018. It's not currently part of the adoption score, so I just have it below there. But the average ESA score for wildlife habitat conservation is also very strong at 74%, so essentially tied with water quality and quantity for top spot. And the trend for this risk area is very slowly increasing, and tracking of the individual practices is also fairly consistent. In 2018, we added a new question that's not included in the performance measure, and we asked, did you avoid bringing land into production that has not been previously cropped? And 83% of the farmers that we talked to agreed with that statement. Our third practice area is manure management. So these practices include handling manure in the most efficient, environmentally sound way. And the ESA adoption score for all 11 manure management practices is also in the top tier at 71%. An overall adoption score has recovered slightly from a significant decline in 2016. So you can see at the top, the green circles. In 2012, the adoption score was 75%. In 2014, 76%, very consistent. Then it dropped significantly in 2016, down to 69%. And so we're slightly recovering from that. Adoption scores are very high on many of the individual practices within the manure management area, with more than 3/4 of eligible respondents adopting, avoiding applying compost on frozen or snow-covered ground, avoiding applying manure on frozen or snow-covered ground, avoiding applying close to waterways, close to wells, or near abandoned wells or active wells, keeping manure records and frequency of application. So most of the practices track well with the previous years. Where we see some differences, for example, on frequency of application, the practice of applying manure more frequently than once every 2 years has increased significantly since 2016, from 12% to 26%. So this increase in application has affected the adoption score, and it's declined significantly. Only 3% of farmers applied liquid manure to their land in 2017, the ones that we talked to, and only 24% broadcast with incorporation within 48 hours of application. That was a significant decline from 2016. where in 2016 it was almost double at 57%. We also asked about managing odor and dust under manure management, but these practices aren't included in the manure management adoption score. Operators who stored manure on their farms in 2017 were asked if they used any of these 6 specific practices to manage odor and dust. And the most common practices adopted were the routine removal of manure from feedlot pens and barns at 61%, so the dark blue part of the bar, and use of shelter belts at just under 50%. In the 2018 survey, we changed the wording from frequent manure removal to routine manure removal, and as a result, this practice increased from 13% in 2016 to 61%. And I think that really just suggests that farmers do conduct this practice on a routine basis, but they may not be conducting it frequently, or what their definition of frequently would be. So we've asked them if it's included in some sort of routine, and that's why we saw the jump in practice. The 4th practice area is grazing management, and 2 individual practices of protecting riparian areas from grazing to prevent overuse and timing grazing of riparian areas to avoid spring and summer are included in the overall performance measure. So the grazing management ESA adoption score just trails the top 3 practice areas at 70%, and is really consistent with the past number of years that we've been tracking this. We also asked about a number of other practices that aren't included in the adoption score, and the adoption of these practices in particular are fairly high. So we're asking if producers are timing the grazing of native rangelands, and adoption is at 93%. If they're rotating the use of pasture as part of their grazing management, and adoption's very high there. Whether they're annually considering or adjusting stocking rates to balance livestock forage demand with available forage supply, and whether they're moving livestock away from riparian areas using tools and methods such as salt blocks, windbreaks, or herding, and adoption is just under 3/4 for that practice. The 5th practice area is agricultural waste management. And ag waste in this study is defined as agricultural plastics such as baler twine, feed bags, silage wraps, and then crop protection product containers. And waste management practices involve recycling these items. And the performance measure or overall adoption score only includes recycling plastics. So we have more than 50% adopting this practice at this time, keeping on trend with 2016 and up significantly from 2012 and 2014, where we were at 41%. So we've seen a good jump in recycling plastics. The adoption of recycling crop protection product containers is very high at 95%, and it's on trend with previous years. Or sorry, 92%, and it's on trend with previous years. So moving on to practice area number 6, soil conservation. And these are practices that help to prevent soil erosion or fertility being changed due to nutrient depletion. They include using reduced tillage, using pulse crops in rotation, and using winter cereals in rotation. And although the average ESA score is 2nd lowest of all the practice areas that we review, it's improved significantly over 2016 at 28%, up from 22% in 2016. And this overall increase is likely because of the use of reduced tillage has increased significantly compared to 2016. So it jumped from 42% up to 51%. And the use of perennial forages, which is not part of our performance measure, but that we do ask about, it has declined significantly from 2016, down to 35% from 44%. Practice area number seven are 3 practices that affect energy and climate change. And the average ESA adoption score for energy and climate change practices is 15%, on trend with 2016, but both years are down significantly from 2014 and 2012. Adoption, you can see that adoption of renewable power is down significantly to 11% from 24% in 2016. And adoption for this measure is based on using 1 of 7 renewable energy methods to produce grid-connected electricity, and that's shown in the graph below. In 2018, part of the reason for the drastic change is that in 2018, the question about wood combustion specifically stated large-scale wood combustion for the barn. In 2016, we simply asked about wood combustion and we didn't specify large-scale, and we didn't specify for the barn. And so this change is reflected in the results because in 2016, respondents may have included smaller-scale wood combustion for their homes or their workshops. So in 2018, this dropped significantly from 21% down to 3%. And using solar panels has significantly increased by 30% up to 39% over the past 2 years. This could be a direct result of the ministry funding of farm solar panels that was awarded in 2016 that we wouldn't have seen in the 2016 survey. The last practice area is general practices, and it includes the use of variable rate technology, completing an environmental farm plan, soil sampling, and planting trees. And the average ESA score for general practices is low at 36%. It's a significant decline from 2016. And we believe the reason for this decline is the way in which we asked about planting trees for ag purposes this year, since all other individual practices track well against previous years. In 2018, we asked specifically if farmers had planted trees for ag purposes. And we gave examples of what that might be. Those who said yes were then marked as having adopted that practice. In 2016, farmers were asked if they planted trees, and then if they answered yes, they were asked for what purpose, and if they checked off any reason on the list, they were considered to have adopted the practice, whether or not they believed it was for ag purposes or not, or whether they planted trees specifically for ag purposes. So that's why we see that drastic reduction in adoption for this practice. So it's had a significant impact on the practice. But again, I think we improved the question. Okay, I see that we're still having some people are struggling to understand the adoption and eligibility relationship. Okay, so let's go back to, let's see what one would make sense. Well, take the one that I was just talking about, the trees for agriculture purposes. We asked that question of everyone we talked to, every farmer we talked to. So the eligibility is 100%. 100% of the farmers that we talked to are eligible for that practice. And so of everybody we talked to, 15% of farmers stated that they specifically planted trees for agriculture purposes. And that's why the adoption score is at 15, because that practice was asked of everybody. Take precision farming, the variable rate technology, and commercial fertilizer just above. The eligibility percent was 69%. So we asked previously, though that question would have been asked of farmers that were cropping, and I can't remember, that seems like that's probably a double, there's probably another requirement there, but so 69% of the farmers that we talked to were eligible for that general practice, And of the 69% of farmers, 26% of them were conducting that practice. So I'm just gonna, that basically rounds out our discussion of the ESA practices. And I'll show you one question that we asked about resources and tools. This question was first asked in 2016, and operators were asked about their awareness and usage of 11 decision-making support resources and tools that focus on projects, programs, and services that are delivered by the Environmental Stewardship Branch. And this question was asked again in 2018, and we included a number of new resources and tools. The most used resources and tools are local extension personnel and completing the environmental farm plan. In 2016, local extension personnel were also the most used resource by operators. The least used are the Alberta Phosphorus Management Tool and Alberta Agriculture's Manure Tracker app, with less than 5% of participation and the weakest awareness levels. So you can see on the right-hand side of the bars, the darker green means that's the number of respondents that had never heard about these tools or resources. And you can see that 3/4 of farmers have not even heard about the Alberta Phosphorus Management Tool and the Manure Tracker app. I also did look at the results of this by gross farm sales and by participation in a number of programs. And so it's notable that the use of almost all of the resources and tools that we've evaluated here is significantly higher on operations where the producer has an ag degree or diploma, has attended an environmental ag training program, workshop, or seminar in the past 2 years. And the use of these resources and tools in general is also significantly higher as gross farm sales increase. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears and discuss the results of the new objective for 2018, which was to measure awareness and readiness of Alberta producers to meet current and emerging sustainability schemes, which have expectations on agricultural production systems. So we started with the question to better understand where sustainability areas rank in importance with other issues that producers face on their operations and how much impact they may have in the short term. So not surprisingly, above all other issues, the cost of farming inputs is the issue that greater than 50% of operators state could have a significant impact in the way they manage their farm in the next 3 to 5 years. No other issue was rated as having a significant impact by more than half of the operators. So I've highlighted it there at the top. And then after cost of inputs, there's many areas of sustainability and how they're managed that rank as issues in which producers will believe will have a significant impact on their farms in the next 3 to 5 years. And I've starred them. So you've got animal care regulations, restricted market access due to trade barriers, environmental regulations, farm safety regulations, biosecurity, food safety and health regulations, etc. So we didn't outright ask about sustainability per se, but we instead looked at various areas that are included in the definition of sustainability. And so if these issues are potentially impacting farming practices, then sustainability or sustainability programs could have an impact on the way in which farming operations are managed. So we then asked operators to rate how important they thought various areas of sustainability are, and that's really to get a sense of which areas producers feel are more important than others when it comes to sustainability. And then we asked them to state which areas they feel the most pressure from consumers. So that's on the right-hand side of the slide. And the most important areas of sustainability stated by farm operators are equally animal welfare and economic sustainability. So the environment which is the traditional definition of sustainability, or sort of how we started thinking about sustainability long ago, rates much lower on the list at 54%. I mean, it's not drastically different overall, but you've got animal welfare, economic sustainability, farm safety, and on-farm food safety rating as more important than environment in terms of an area of sustainability. Whereas from the consumer's perspective, or where farmers are feeling pressure from consumers, farmers feel the most pressure with respect to animal welfare. So that still remains number one. That's the most from consumers as well, is the pressure on regarding animal welfare, as well as on-farm food safety. So farm safety and economic sustainability drop off significantly. And I think it's because those areas that affect farming operations only, not necessarily the consumers, so they're less consumer-facing issues, are the areas with the least pressure from consumers. I think that makes sense. We then asked a series of questions more specific to sustainability standards and programs. So farmers were read the description of sustainability standards, and it's shown here on the left-hand side of the slide, and then asked generally, are they familiar with sustainability standards? So nearly 90% of farmers know about sustainability standards. They either know a lot about them or a little about them, but less than 1 in 5 farmers know a lot about them. So with the majority of farmers knowing a little or knowing at least something about sustainability standards, there isn't an awareness issue, but a familiarity issue with the standards. So if you know a little bit about something, you're aware about it. If you know a lot about it, we consider you to be more familiar with it. So there's not an awareness issue when it comes to sustainability standards, but there seems to be a familiarity issue. And on the right-hand side, you can see the percentage of operators who know a lot about sustainability standards by some of the demographics that we've looked at. So as you can see, familiarity with these standards is significantly higher on farms with the largest gross farm sales, operations that are expanding, and with operators who have participated in any of the programs listed, have an ag degree, a diploma, have participated with some of the Working Well program resources, or have completed the EFP or worked with ministry or municipal staff. Of those operators who knew a little or a lot about sustainability standards, we asked them to tell us what they consider to be the benefits and the drawbacks of them. So what we found was that operators understand that sustainability standards have industry benefits. There's production benefits as well as benefits from a consumer perspective. And public awareness and protecting the environment and standardization were the 3 most referenced benefits of sustainability standards. And this was an open-ended question that we asked, and then we coded their responses. On the opposite side, when we asked about drawbacks, operators note that there's some inconvenience that these standards can cause trying to comply with new requirements, and the difficulty in compliance, the cost and information is confusing. There's a lack of information, and consumers don't understand how the standards would actually affect production practices, and producers see that as a drawback. So by far, an increase in farm costs as a result of complying with these standards was the most referenced drawback, but we got a lot of other information as well. Overall, I think there was a relatively balanced perception toward the standards. Most producers we talked to were able to provide both the benefits and the drawbacks. There's still about a quarter of producers, when we asked this question, don't know what the benefits were and didn't know what the drawbacks were. So there is some room for education on that end. We then asked farmers to indicate their agreement with a number of statements around sustainability certification. So although sustainability standards and certification are no longer new, there still remains a large proportion of operators who really have no strong opinions about them. And that's really the blue band in the middle. So anywhere from 1/3 of producers up to 45% of producers, when asked about, asking to agree on some statements, really don't have a strong opinion. And really just provided some neutral ratings. So as you can see, half of producers would only undergo certification if they received a premium for their products in return, suggesting that most farmers will comply when there's a financial reward, but they're not interested in these programs if there is no financial reward. Similarly, just over 1/3 of producers would only undergo sustainability certification if required, so only complying when it becomes a business risk not to, whereas 22% strongly disagreed with that statement, so suggesting that 22% of farmers would undergo certification whether required or not. Most producers than not, so the 36% versus 23% in that middle statement, agree that such programs will be part of doing business in the future. Most are neutral, maybe a little bit unsure as to the importance of the standards in the future. And nearly equal proportions agree or disagree that they need training to be better prepared for sustainability certification. And only 21% indicate that they want to learn more about sustainability certification. I then looked at the attitudes toward these statements by farm size and by stage of operation. So gross farm sales, as well as whether or not the operation was beginning or maintaining, whether they're expanding or reducing. And I actually thought I would see more differences than I did. You can see that the larger farms agreed with the statement more so than the small farms that they would undergo sustainability certification only if required, and that they also agreed, though, that it is going to be an important part of doing business in the future, significantly more than the smaller farms. So you're looking at 28% of the small farms agreed that certification programs will be part of doing business in the future. That jumps to 38% and 40% of the larger farms agree with that statement. This is where I thought it would be opposite. The larger farms, and maybe that's because many of the larger farms are those that maybe they already know about sustainability certification programs or are participating in programs, but the need for training or wanting to learn more is significantly less on the larger farms than it is for the other farms. So 31% of respondents in the two smaller farm sizes feel they need some more training, only 22% of the larger farms. I'm not saying that they don't want training. Maybe those larger farms are the ones that are participating in training now. And then when you look at stage of operation, there aren't very many significant differences, except the same with the training and the wanting to learn more about sustainability certification. Fewer of the farms that are expanding feel they need more training or want to learn more compared to those that are reducing or maintaining. Whereas when I thought about it before I looked at the data, I thought I would see the opposite. And very few interactions. Respondents have had very few interactions with sustainability programs in the marketplace. So it's likely that farmers have no strong opinions about sustainability certification or feel that they need any training in the area because only 1 in 10 or 11% on the left-hand side, the 4% plus the 7%, of producers have been required or urged to participate in a sustainability program. And only 12% of producers on the right-hand side have found opportunities that require participation in a sustainability certification program. So given the lack of requirement or recommendation to participate, I don't think it's unreasonable that familiarity with them is low. Most producers will only likely become familiar with sustainability certification or standard programs once they've been required or urged to participate. So we asked about familiarity and participation in specific sustainability certification programs. And in the report, we asked about a lot more programs that I'm showing here, but we got very specific to some specific dairy programs, some specific poultry programs and other commodities, and the base sizes got very small. So here I'm just showing you the results of a few of the programs we asked about where the base sizes were larger. So the top 3 programs that we asked about were universal and were asked of all farmers. So the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative and the Farm Sustainability Assessment Program, then the International Sustainability and Carbon Certification Program, and then the Unilever 2017 program. The red bar is the number of farmers who have never heard of the program. The dark green bar, they've heard of it and know a little bit about it. The yellowy green is the percentage that have heard of it and know a lot about it. And the bright green on the right-hand side is the percentage of farmers that are have participated in this program. And so overall, in most cases, the majority of eligible producers had not heard of the programs. And if producers are familiar, they're more likely to know a little than a lot or have participated in the programs. And having more than 5% participation is really exceptional based on all of the programs we looked at. So looking at the Canadian Grain Commission Food Safety Program, they've got 5% of the crop respondents that we asked this program about are participating. We also asked beef producers about the Verified Beef Production Plus program, and that's 15%. In the presentation I gave in Edmonton, someone asked if we could break that down between cow, calf, and feedlot, and I have to look at that and see if I can do that. Because then I think we may be able to see that participation increase even a little bit more. And then lastly, we wanted to get a sense of whether producers felt that the ministry was moving in the right direction when it comes to helping them meet any sustainability requirements. And at this time, very few producers feel that government programs are in alignment to help them prepare to comply with sustainability certification programs. However, since there's little familiarity with the programs themselves, and therefore really little familiarity with what the programs actually require, I don't know that producers know what the government should be providing. So we asked this question, but I'm not sure that they would have an idea of what the ministry should be providing for them. And so therefore, I think it's an opportunity for the ministry to help in promoting the specific programs to eligible producers. If we were to conduct this, if we ask these same questions in 2 years from now, and we increase awareness of these programs, if we move awareness to familiarity of the programs, then I think you will get some better, then I think producers will have a better idea. Once they're more familiar with the programs, they have a better idea of how the ministry can help them out, and maybe we'll see some change in the results of this question as well. So I'll leave it at that, and I can answer any questions you have about what I've presented. If you have questions about the methodology, how I've reported on some of the results, etc., feel free to reach out to me or Laura, who can reach out to me. If you want to know more about what the ministry, how the ministry is using the report and using the information in the report, then that's a question to direct Laura.
Kate, I think we did have some comments or questions in the comment box there. If you wanted to maybe just start with those while we wait to see if anybody else has anything. There was one that was going towards the beginning of your presentation, and they were asking why the conclusion of high livestock respondents versus the rest, the numbers of those maintaining operation production and those who are reducing and expanding don't seem to compute. So I think they were just confused on how it was being presented that way.
Okay, let me just go back to that slide at the beginning. And I can explain the definitions of those, if that'll help.
And while Kate's going towards the slides there, for those that are online, go ahead and type your questions in on the chat box, or like one just did right now, submit by questions. That's perfectly fine too.
Okay, so just asking about the distribution of the main farm type. We asked specifically all of the enterprises that make up gross farm sales in the enterprise, and then we asked specifically which of all the enterprises make up the majority of your gross farm sales. So of those we talked to, of the 500 respondents, 50% said the majority of their gross farm sales come from livestock, 31% come from crops, and then 18% said they were relatively equal. And the other question was with respect to maintaining operation production and reducing. So the beginning, I lumped beginning and maintaining into one, and so you see 49%, probably very few were beginning their career. Most of the 49% would be those that are maintaining production level, maintaining relatively the same production level as previous years, not specifically looking to expand the production. 13% of those we talked to were specifically looking to expand one type of enterprise on their operation, and 37% of respondents we talked to were looking to start reducing, either reducing production level or thinking about transitioning out of the industry, either selling or succeeding to a family member or other partner.
Thank you, Kim. We do have a question about the wells. Do you have an idea why adoption of inactive wells is so low? Is it because of low awareness of the risks? Is there any other reasons?
Okay. Let me get to that. Yeah, so the adoption of proper maintenance of the inactive wells is only at 50%. And to be honest, I'm not exactly sure why that would be. It's nice to see that it's, proper maintenance of active wells is almost universal at 95%, but I'm not sure why, whether or not they feel that they properly capped it or looked after it years ago and then haven't gone back to it. To be honest, I'm not sure why that is so low. But it's a good question that we could follow up on.
There was a question on eligibility measurement used in the computation, but I'm not quite sure which slide Ronald was referring to. If you could clarify that in your chat box, that would be great. And we'll move on to the next question until we can confirm what slides you were wanting that clarification on. Another question was, has the consultant made recommendations to AF based on the survey?
No, we haven't. You know, we used to do that, and what we found was the ministry knows more about the programs that they're thinking about implementing, the services, etc. And so when Laura and Roger and I chatted about it this year, we thought that was something that I didn't need to provide because I don't understand all of the programs and services as much as the ministry does. And so Laura and her team then take this information and think about recommendations. If Laura wants to add to that, she can, but that's sort of how we left it this year.
There's another question here on how was the data on sustainability issues from the consumer's perspective gathered? Was there a separate survey for consumers, or was this the perception of what producers think consumers want?
It was, that's exactly it, the latter. We asked producers where they felt the most consumer pressure was coming from with respect to those areas of sustainability. What we could do next time is, I know the Center for Food Integrity in their consumer trust work does ask consumers you know, a number of questions about sustainability and their awareness and where they feel farmers need to do a better job, things like that. We could always compare the results from the Center for Food Integrity to what we have in our survey. But that question was specifically where they feel the most consumer pressure.
Well, at this time there's one question that just popped up here, just as I was about to say there was none on there. Let me just copy it in here for you, Kate, so you can see it as well. Can you please recap on the methods used for the survey? I heard landlines being used, no online survey. Were the producers surveyed already established partners with AF, or were they cold calls?
Okay, so this survey we conduct all of the surveys via telephone. The reason we do that is because we have these specific quotas we're looking for by region, gross farm sales, and well, just those two, the gross farm sales and the region specifically. If we were to conduct the survey online, we don't have control of how many respondents we'd be able to talk to by region or by farm size. These are not partners established with the ministry. And I wouldn't consider them cold calls also. We call, Kynetec has a farmer panel of, it's about 100,000 farmers across the country that have agreed to take surveys on various topics. So if they're livestock producers, we'll ask them a number of times about animal health products. We talk about crop products with crop producers. And so we have our database of Alberta farmers. And so they do know us and do participate in surveys every once in a while for us. So they're familiar with Kynetec. When we do call them, they know that they need to participate in the surveys for us. So I forget exactly how many we have in Alberta, but I want to say it's upwards of 20,000 farm records in Alberta, and that's why we're able to conduct 500 surveys within a 2-week span.
last call for any other questions for Kate. Otherwise, I think this was a really great webinar and good details for us to look further into on the survey. I will paste the URL into our web chat here so everybody can go to the direct link of our 2018 Environmental Sustainable Agriculture Tracking Survey report, and you can download the whole thing. The link is also on our environmental stewardship branch page as well too.
Thanks, everybody.
Laura, do you
Thank
have any
you.
last?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if Laura had any last comments at all, or.
No, other than thank you for attending today. And obviously, if you've got any questions that come to mind later on, Kate showed a slide of how to get a hold of me. You can either give me a call at 780-980-4200 or fire me off an email at laura.ung@gov.ab.ca. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Just to close here, this webinar has been recorded, so you should receive an email with a link to the webinar if you want to view it again. And I think the webinar recording will also be uploaded on the Alberta Agriculture website, so it should be there as well. And we'd like to thank you for your participation and have a good day. We'll close out the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.